The sequel to the most successful movie of all time is now out, so how is it? Now, for the first part of this review, I'm going to go with no spoilers, so let's get into it. Now, first and foremost, as most of you are probably aware or can imagine, the visuals are the most important thing to talk about with this film. If there's any element in this film that is beyond reproach, it's this one. There are times in this movie where it feels like you're watching an episode of Planet Earth underwater in an alien planet, and it is in fact stunning. The hype is real, and even to suggest that Planet Earth, which has some of the greatest cinematography and greatest camera work of all time, the fact that you can emulate that in a completely novel, made-up alien world is incredibly impressive, and James Cameron deserves all of the praise that he's getting for this feat. I mean, some of the details are just so amazing. One thing that really stands out is you can just see the individual pores on people's skin, and you can see how the rain interacts with the pores on their skin. You can see individual raindrops interacting with people's action during an action scene in the movie when it's dark and it's raining and the rain is interacting with the moondrops. I mean, it is a technical feat. It is amazing. And when James Cameron is doing what he does best, which is dramatizing an action scene, the movie is at its most amazing. I mean, the last hour of the film is so awesome. Basically, the last hour of the film is one prolonged action sequence, and it just rips. It's so good. I can't. That's enough reason to see the movie. And sometimes, not giving too much away here, but the last action scene is a little bit comically reminiscent of Titanic at times, at least the effects and the things that he learned during his production of the original Titanic. But really, that last action scene justifies everything, all the criticisms that I'm about to make about the film. The first and most obvious criticism, which is one that you're probably going to hear a lot, is that the plot is a little bit bare bones. And when you have such a bare bones plot, that can be pretty taxing for a 3-hour movie. In my experience, the first 2 hours of the movie are pretty boring, but that last hour is just balls to the wall awesome. Now, usually the most important thing when evaluating a movie, well, not the most important thing, but really if this piece doesn't work, then nothing works, is performance. And the performances here are largely fine. A couple of them are a little bit lackluster. For example, I think that the guy who plays Spider did a fine job, but it was a little bit lackluster in my opinion. It left a little bit to be desired. But to be fair, the actors here are really not working with the most complex characters. There's not a lot of meat to their roles. And some of this does have to do with the effects. For example, the character Spider is a human, whereas all the rest of the characters are Na'vi, or the lighter blue water characters. And that distinction between the human skin and the alien skin, or the Na'vi skin, it always was begging a comparison between, okay, this is real photography and this is the special effects enhanced photography. And that comparison always kind of brought me out of the movie. And sometimes, and it's not often, the movie is very, very polished, but sometimes it did kind of get into that creepy, uncanny valley territory, especially when you see the Na'vi and the water people making very human emotions, specifically with smiles. I would oftentimes see them smiling, or they're smiling and running, some kind of a shot or an emotion that required a lot of movement or a lot of dynamics in the facial region. It always kind of felt a little bit too real, or it looked too human, and it kind of reminded me that what I'm seeing is not an exact human being, and again, kind of always took me out of the movie. And there was also parts like, for example, when they're emerging from water. The visuals are incredible. There's so much water just careening down their faces. And to me, it almost seemed like, wait, is this like too much water? It almost felt hyper real in that sense. Now, I could be totally wrong. James Cameron could have done years of research to determine how much water would come down the faces of these particular creatures at a particular velocity, and I could be wrong. But I guess the point is, I still thought about it. It still looked like such a unique visual spectacle that it required me to actually consider it, and that took me out of the plot. And that's worth mentioning. But again, we're really nitpicking here. There's this popular anecdote told about the production of Peter Jackson's King Kong, and that production was definitely a trailblazer in terms of CGI and green screen technology, and Jack Black played the main character. And the story goes that Jack Black was being directed by Peter Jackson, and so often during the production of the movie, Peter Jackson would just say, "Oh, that's fine, we'll fix it in post. That's fine, we'll fix it in post." And Jack Black had a close-up, and Peter Jackson was directing him, and apparently in the first take, Jack Black did not do what Peter Jackson wanted, and Peter Jackson said, "Cut, all right, let's do it again." And Jack Black, at least as the legend goes, says, "Oh, well, why don't you just fix my emotion in post like you're fixing everything else?" And that's kind of like what this movie feels like at times, because every time an emotional beat works, I feel like I'm more in awe of technical wizardry and not necessarily empathizing with these very raw human, or I guess in this case, semi-human emotions. Overall, I would say the film kind of feels akin to a roller coaster. You know how when you're waiting in line for a roller coaster, they'll feed you some lore, usually over some speakers, that gives you context for all the thrills and jerks that you're about to experience on the ride. That's kind of how the plot of the movie feels. It feels like the plot is just the flavor to accompany the visuals. Because nobody remembers the lore from roller coaster rides. I mean, I guess unless you're like a big theme park super nerd. And I just saw the movie last night, and there's very little sticking in my mind other than this kind of vague appreciation for the visuals. And that's largely how the first movie is remembered, as a technical feat, something that really captured people's attention because it was so visceral and so pretty to look at and just complete eye candy. But the plot, largely also because it was derivative, is something that's forgotten, and I expect maybe something similar is going to happen here. Okay, so let's get into the spoiler territory now. Now we're going to be talking about the specifics of the plot. Other than the fact that the plot is relatively thin for a 3-hour movie, I think the real biggest problem that we're dealing with here is that the motivations, the character motivations, are a little bit on the thin side. Basically, Sully decides that instead of gathering the tribe to fight the humans, the same expansionist humans, sky people from the first movie, that he's going to bring his family to the water people, and they're just gonna hide out. Now, the problem with this is that it's counter to the logic that brought his family and his whole tribe enough peace that they were able to raise a family for the last decade. I mean, they fought for that peace and they won. Now, I think what Cameron was going for here is that we're supposed to believe that now he's a father, his priorities are primarily on his family, and then only at the end does he realize that he's gonna have to fight anyway, because you can prioritize your family, you can hide, and you can still, spoiler, end up losing members of your family. So as a result, the second act of the movie, basically when they get to the water place or the water part of Pandora, can get a little bit boring. In fact, I really feel like the second act feels more like a special effects exhibition than it does a continuation of the journey of Jake and his family. As a matter of fact, Jake is largely absent in the second act. All he does is kind of scold the young ones in order to navigate the politics of being a well-liked refugee. Instead, we have like whale parties and long scenes that are kind of reminiscent of Superman Returns, where Superman is just kind of flying aimlessly in the stars and the audience is like, okay, this is cool, it looks cool, why am I seeing this? It's kind of the same thing here with Jake and the kids kind of swimming along with the beautiful ocean scenery. And again, it is beautiful, and it might even be beautiful enough to justify it kind of dampening the trajectory of the plot, but I guess that's up for you guys to decide. Rather, the second act kind of takes the attention away from Jake and focuses more on Jake's youngest son as he goes through some crucial coming-of-age moments. The problem is, he doesn't really learn anything. He's always actually pretty mature, and he's just dealing with his annoying dad not seeing him, not trusting him. It would be more fulfilling if he made mistakes and he grew and not necessarily had to learn from his dad and that his dad was necessarily right, but that he went through certain trials that made him correct his behavior, that made him grow as an individual. But really, it's one of those stories where he starts out right, but just not being trusted by his superiors or his elders, and then eventually he does something that is impressive enough to eventually earn their trust. And then at the end, his father, like in the first, or echoing the first movie, says, "I see you, I accept you, I understand that you are uniquely rebellious in your own way, but I understand the validity of it." From a character perspective, I think this creates a less fulfilling experience than the first one, because in the first one, Jake goes through such major change. He even changes species. He starts off as a gung-ho Marine, and then he ends up joining the indigenous tribe to which the Marines are trying to colonize, and then he comes to lead that tribe. I mean, it is a huge ideological change. It's something that is very powerful to experience, to sit through. In this movie, much less of a transformation takes place. Really, he goes from trying to protect his family or saying that hiding is necessary to protect his family, to knowing that hiding is not enough and that they need to fight, and that he can in fact lose his family still if he decides to run. But the thing is that overcoming hesitancy to fight doesn't make the most compelling action movie, especially when basically the second act is just, all right, let's try to find as much peace as we can with just chillin'. You know, it doesn't really create that much intense action. Now, granted, a lot of this has to be taken with a grain of salt because the second act in a trilogy, or if they're going to make 5 movies, I don't know, but Act 2 is always the hardest. Act 2 is even where less transformation is even supposed to happen. Act 2 is always the most difficult part of writing a script, and so the fact that this movie has some slower parts is kind of understandable, knowing that Cameron has a grander vision for 3 movies or 5 movies, whatever he ends up doing. But it's also the antagonist or the bad guy's motivations that are also pretty muddy in this film. So, contra the first movie, in which the goal of the expansionist humans was to get this resource called unobtainium, which is the most valuable asset in the world, this time the commander says that Earth is dying and humans need to move to Pandora to just live on there because Earth is going to be useless soon. And so then the commander says that they need to kill the agitators so that they can inhabit the land peacefully, that they can start colonizing Pandora peacefully. And they say that they need to kill the leader of the Na'vi. But the thing is, Jake gives up his title as the leader. He gives it to another Na'vi, and then he basically goes off to the Waterland. Now, the rest of the movie pans out to where the antagonists are still single-mindedly going after Jake, but it's not exactly clear why. If they really only need to kill the leader of the Na'vi so that they can start colonizing the land peacefully, well, they can pretty much accomplish a vast majority of that just by going after the Na'vi clan or the central hub and not necessarily going after Jake specifically. And also, what's happening with the tribe? I mean, are they getting massacred off screen? Does Jake care? I mean, this tribe, it's not just the family unit that gave Jake so much inspiration and appreciation for this new life as a Na'vi. It's also the tribe, the community, the nature that he inhabited for so long as a Na'vi, and now all of that is, well, at least it's under threat. I don't know if it's being attacked right now, but it's something that's pretty much just completely forgot after the 45-minute mark in the movie. Overall, it does feel like the characters aren't motivating the plot so much as James Cameron's desire to show how awesome his special effects prowess is the thing that's motivating the plot. But I guess really my question then is this a bad thing? The traditional wisdom with storytelling, and specifically cinematic storytelling, is that form should follow function, which basically means that all of the visual and audio decisions should be made so that it affects or helps the telling of the story, that all the visual and audio choices enhance the telling of the story, and this is whether it's a character journey or like a high concept thriller like a Nolan film. But is Avatar 2 different? It perhaps seems like this movie could have been conceived with a little bit of a reverse logic, as if the emotional beats and the theme are chosen because they may sufficiently stir up our emotions enough to give the visuals weight. Like an episode of Alien Planet Earth that integrates a plot just to keep the tempo going. And so I guess the question then is beauty enough? Can beauty really be enough to make the plot work or to overcome the limitations of the plot? Well, I guess my answer to that is if something is so overwhelmingly sublime that you become completely invested and it breaks down your inhibitions and you fully identify with the characters and become fully immersed, then I suppose this approach is just as valid. Granted, that didn't really happen for me, but hey, different strokes for different folks. Now, I'm tempted here to do a kind of ideological analysis like I do in some of my other videos, but honestly, a lot of what would be obvious to talk about overlaps with my most recent Black Panther 2 video. To be honest, it's a lot of the same ecology, guilt porn, and self-righteous misanthropy from the first one. This one has the added be nice to refugees thing, which certainly resonates with the current and future challenges that humanity is going to have to face due to ecological breakdown. Now, the degree to which this movie is an authentic call for humans to change their orientation towards the environment and not just a savvy capitalization on themes that trigger our collective guilt and stir up emotions is a subject for another video. But all the politics and ideology aside, the movie is really mostly about Jake navigating the responsibilities of fatherhood, and in that, the movie is mostly successful. So overall, I would say go see the movie. I don't want to give you the idea that I didn't like it. There's so much great craft in this movie. And I think that there's a good chance the movie could really work as a very visceral, enjoyable experience for you. And so I recommend that everybody go see it. Go see it in a theater, because really it can only be good for the overall theater experience in the future of movies if this movie is as big of a hit as the first one. Now, whether or not it will be that big of a hit, well, I'm not really a betting man, but I mean, it could happen. It could happen, especially with COVID and people largely still not going to the theater in masses. I mean, people have been going to the theater, but there's still a lot of people who have not gone to the theater since COVID. If this is the thing that draws them back into the theater, I think it could create as much of a cultural wave of excitement as the first one, but we'll see. Anyway, be sure to catch me on Twitch. The link is in the description. I'm playing God of War Mondays and Thursdays at 8 a.m. Pacific. The game is so good. It's so good. I mean, you want to talk about a cinematic experience, this game has definitely got that. Be sure to subscribe to the Twitch, subscribe to this channel for more content, and as always, I'll catch you guys later. Peace.